Alright guys, welcome back to the shop. So we've got a few things we need to get done before we can move on with the joinery and that today. So first thing, we have to get all of our panels out of the clamps. We have to clamp up that last headboard panel. Then we have to finish cleaning up all of these long stretchers using the track saw. So we've got a little bit of work to do before we can get into the fun part of doing the joinery. But we can just kind of quickly move through all that beginning stuff because it's not super exciting, just kind of something that needs to get done. So we now have all of our boards fully milled up. Everything's looking good. So what we're going to start on now is our side rails and our footboard. We're not going to do anything on the headboard today, purely because we're still waiting for that third panel to harden up. And before I go through and cut any of the grooves and that, I want to make sure that I have the panels fully thickness. So that brings us to our next point. We need to get all of our panels for the side rails and the footboard. We need to get them down to their final thicknesses, all cleaned up through the drum sander, making sure that those are completely ready to install before we go through and cut all our grooves on here. Because like I figured out on the last bed frame, the way I did it there is I got those panels up to 80 grit, then I made sure they slotted in nice and tight onto the grooves we cut into the headboard and footboard. Now in the end, they fit up just fine, but I wasn't super happy with the fit. So I want to make sure that this time we actually make sure that we fully finish up those panels. We're going to sand them all the way up to 220 grit on the drum sander. Then all that'll be left over after that, we will do after everything is kind of built and put together here, is a final 180 grit hand sanding. That'll just clean up some of those drum sander marks from the 220 grit. So we now have all of our panels fully thickness down to 3/4 of an inch, and they're sanded up to 220 grit for the most part. I have to say that although I complain about that machine a lot, and I don't like that Laguna drum sander very much because it's a very finicky machine, it is really nice to have a drum sander in the shop, because if you've ever worked with maple before, you know that it's very prone to tear out, especially through straight bladed machinery like my planer, like my jointer, all that kind of. So when I put these panels through the planer, obviously I got a lot of tear in that. So being able to get them down to thickness through the drum sander, then get them all the way up to 220 grit surface, all I have left to do is a little bit of hand sanding. That is a pretty nice thing, and it took about an hour and a half to do all of these panels. Comparatively, if I was to sand all these panels with a random orbital sander, it would take me a lot more than an hour and a half to get them up to 220 grit across all of the panels. So they would have a little bit of a cleaner finish on them, I will give it that, but they wouldn't be perfectly thickness and flat, and these are perfectly flat. Okay, so on to cutting the grooves now. As you guys can probably tell by the mess all around the workbench here, I've already started and I've already cut a couple. I've done them on 2 of our stretchers so far because the first one I ran into some issues. So I wanted to try something on the second one. Let's see if the issue is still there, and it is. So this bit is the one that I used on the last bed project, and it's the one I started using today. Now I think that this bit is just completely too dull to be working with this hard maple. We used this same bit on the walnut bed, and I think that because walnut is softer, I noticed that it was kind of struggling, but on the maple here, it is really, really struggling. It's tearing out the grains. It's just doing stuff that a spiral bit should not do. So I have 2 options here. I can go to my backup bit, which I've got in this router right now, or I can go and buy another one of these bits. Now this bit costs $85 to replace. I can also get it sharpened, but then I'd have to wait a few days to get it back, so that's not an option. So I need to get these grooves cut today. So we're going with my backup bit here, which is just a 2-sided carbide straight bit. Now I hate using straight bits because they generally do not do as good of a job as a spiral bit can do. But when my options are a very, very dull spiral bit versus a brand new, I've never used this bit before, because what this will also show me is if this bit is struggling in this wood too, it might not be that the bit is super dull. I know it's dull and I definitely need to get it sharpened, but it might not be only the bit. It might just be that we're cutting grooves into hard maple, and that could be all the issue is here. Because like I said at the beginning of the series, working with hard maple is what's making this bed so much more challenging compared to the last one. Okay, so we've got the grooves cut in all of our pieces, because what we're going to do next is we're going to cut all of our pieces to size. So we're going to cut these shorter ones on the table saw using the miter gauge, and then we're going to cut the longer ones using the track saw and that fancy little jig thing that I have for the track saw. Then once that's done, we're going to cut the tenons onto these pieces, and we're going to base our footboard and our 2 side rails off of the size of all these pieces. So these are all going to be batched out to be the exact same size. Now this is completely different than what we did on the last project. We cut the mortises into the legs, then cut the tenons into the long stretchers, mounted all that in place. Once those were mounted in place, then we fit up our middle dividers because that gave us a nice accurate fit. But the reason I'm doing it this way this time is because we've got a lot of dividers here. And so if I have to go through and fit up each one, that's going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt. Whereas if I can get all of these to be the exact same size, I can hold together our side rails and our footboard, then transfer those tenon positions onto our legs, then we should be just fine. So one last thing to mention with these grooves, when I switched over to the straight bit, the brand new straight bit I should say, it only did marginally better than the super dull spiral bit. The straight bit definitely was a lot more of a smashing action. If you guys have ever used a straight bit versus a spiral bit, the spiral bit kind of slices the material out and you're left with a lot of really fine shavings. Whereas the straight bit, it kind of smashes material as it goes through. So especially on a wood like maple where you get a lot of different grain changes in that, that smashing action of the straight bit leaves a little bit of a rougher internal surface here. But overall, I'm not that worried about it because it's the inside of a groove that's going to be filled with a panel. It's not like it's something you're going to be feeling or touching anytime soon, so it's not that big of a deal. Alright guys, so the plunge saw did great. We got all of our ends squared up. I was just getting set up to start cutting our mortises and that, and I realized that that straight bit is not a plunge bit. Now, it will plunge, but it does not like it. The shop currently smells like cookies, which if you've ever worked with maple, you know exactly what's happening. That is one of the benefits of maple, is that when you start burning it, it smells lovely. But anyway, that's not something that we want to have happen. Obviously, if it's not a plunge bit, I can't use it to plunge. So we'll have to go back to that dull spiral bit, and that should work just fine. We're only clearing out a little bit of material in each of these mortises here. We're only going down another ½ inch, so we've already gone through. So it's not that much material to clear out here. So we'll just go back to the dull. But that is going to do it for today, guys, because I don't feel like changing out that bit. But in reality, I'm actually just out of time in the shop. It's not just me being lazy, not wanting to touch that bit. So tomorrow when we come back in, we're going to get all of our mortises cut. We're going to get our tendons cut on our divider pieces, and we should start to see some structure coming together here. Hopefully by tomorrow, our side rails should be pretty much ready to go. But anyways, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.